Let's jump right into today's explainer, where we're unpacking a highly provocative investigative article by Paul Craig Roberts. It's called Fauci Rats on Himself. Today, we're looking closely at a text that maps out 16 really intense systemic allegations about the pandemic, and it all revolves around what the author calls the Fauci Diaries. Now, we're not here to validate or debunk any of this. Instead, we're going to organize these 16 keynotes into a structured visual dossier, just so you can clearly understand exactly what's being asserted in the source material.
So to make sense of all these complex claims, we've broken the 16 keynotes down into a 5-part agenda. First up, the diary revelations. Second, tracing the virus origins. Third, mandates and medical outcomes. Fourth, allegations of systemic corruption. And finally, intent, fear, and future.
All right, starting off with Section 1, the Diary Revelations, where we'll unpack Keynote 1.
The author immediately sets the tone for his entire argument right here. He claims these diaries basically act as a literal, written confession of misconduct by top public health officials. By putting this quote front and center, Roberts is framing his main premise, which is that the evidence for these allegations isn't hidden away in some secret vault, it's actually documented by the subjects themselves. He frames it as an undeniable trail of criminality that, and he finds this astonishing, hasn't resulted in any legal consequences.
Moving right along to Section 2, tracing the virus origins, funding, engineering, and release. According to the text, the virus was man-made. Roberts traces a very distinct path here. He claims the initial work was actually funded at a university in North Carolina before being relocated over to Wuhan, China. And it goes further. Referencing Soren Rost's Coast Guard's book, The New September 11th, the author asserts that the virus was actually released in several countries months prior to its official discovery in China. So he's suggesting a coordinated rollout rather than just an accidental breakout.
Building on that timeline, another major keynote makes a super-specific claim about the virus itself. The author asserts this wasn't some natural occurrence that just happened to cross over to humans. Instead, he claims the virus was actively and deliberately engineered. The stated goal? Well, according to the text, it was to maximize spreadability across populations and make it deadly. Though Roberts does note that it ultimately fell short of its intended lethality.
Let's shift gears to Section 3, mandates and medical outcomes, focusing on lockdowns, treatments, and skepticism.
Now, here's where Roberts makes a highly controversial claim. He argues there was a massive imbalance between the threat and the cure. Basically, he states that the actual virus was less deadly than the official medical treatments deployed against it. In his view, the hospitalization protocols and the authorized treatments were the real source of harm. It completely flips the traditional understanding of the medical response on its head.
Chronologically, the author argues that the response was rolled out in damaging steps. Step 1 involved government mask and lockdown mandates, which he claims intentionally added to the societal toll. Step 2, the strict enforcement of vaccine mandates by governments and major employers. And then Step 3 highlights his observation that the people who maintained skepticism, avoided the vaccine, and stayed out of hospitals were the ones who ultimately escaped unhurt.
To accurately capture the sheer intensity of the author's rhetoric regarding these mandates, we really have to look at his exact wording here. He doesn't just call the vaccine ineffective, he literally labels it a backup human extermination tool. That's intense. He frames the mandates as actions taken by ignorant and corrupt authorities. This language really highlights the absolute severity of the accusations he's leveling at global governments and medical institutions.
Which brings us to Section 4. Allegations of systemic corruption, a compromised infrastructure. So, how could something like this happen, according to the author?
While the text alleges a massive, interconnected web of complicity, the author points the finger directly at 3 major pillars. First, he claims medical boards are completely bought and paid for by Big Pharma. Second, he uses the pretty inflammatory term whore media to describe a press that he believes is silenced and controlled by its reliance on pharmaceutical advertising dollars. And third, he asserts that the U.S. Congress is equally compromised by industry money, which prevents any real oversight.
And the practical effect of all that systemic corruption, according to the author, is that this vast crime is deliberately not being investigated. When unpacking Keynote 12, the article points specifically to U.S. Senator Ron Johnson. It states that whenever political figures like him try to uncover the truth about the pandemic, they're systematically blocked and rebuffed by this exact same alliance of a big pharma-funded Congress and an advertising-dependent media.
Okay, let's head into our final part, Section 5, Intent, Fear, and Future,
the ultimate claims. Having outlined the origins, the response, and the alleged corruption, what does Roberts say was the ultimate goal?
Summarizing his core thesis in one of his final keynotes, Roberts leans on Coast Guard's documentation again to make a staggering claim. He states that for educated professionals in the field, there's endless documentation proving the pandemic wasn't an accident or a mismanaged crisis. Instead, he asserts it was an intended assassination of the human race. And he presents this in the text not as a fringe theory, but as an established fact known to anyone who has parsed the technical data.
Pivoting from the past to the future, the author warns that the general public is currently being driven by fear toward an unknown destination, completely lacking the knowledge to see the broader picture. Because of this societal blind spot, he predicts that a second, similar attack is already on the horizon. And to underline this point, the article claims that prominent figures, specifically naming Bill Gates, are actually gloating about these impending future events.
So, that leaves us with the author's 16th and final keynote. Having laid out this entire 16-point dossier alleging engineered viruses, deadly mandates, and total institutional corruption, Roberts turns the lens right back on the public. He challenges the viewer's awareness and survival instinct with a blunt question: are the American people too stupid to survive? It's a pretty jarring conclusion, designed to force the reader to evaluate their own understanding of the world. But regardless of where you stand on these explosive claims from the source material, it leaves us with a fascinating critical question to ponder for ourselves. Just how fragile are the institutions we rely on, and what happens when that trust is fundamentally broken? Thanks for joining us for this explainer of the Fauci Diaries dossier.